Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. After looking at the political and security landscape at the regional and global level this morning and in the last session, now we would continue to analyze ASEAN as an emerging global and regional player, and what should be ASEAN's strategy to promote this role. And this afternoon, our panelists include three outstanding professors. The first one is Professor Carolina Hernandez. She is the founding president and chief executive officer of the Institute for Strategic and Development Studies in the Philippines. She is also Professor Emeritus in Political Science at the University of Philippines, where she taught there from 1964 until she retired at the year of 2006. She was also a founding member of ASEAN ISIS, SCAP, ACEC, APSC, and her writing in the area of security sector reform, security sector governance, peace building, democratization, and human rights, East Asian regionalism, territorial dispute, human security, and track to diplomacy. And our second professor, Professor Shafwan Al-Bana Khwairusat, I hope I did the correct pronunciation. Currently, he is the Executive Secretary of the ASEAN Study Center at the Faculty of Social and Political Sciences, University of Indonesia. He is also the lecturer at this faculty in the Department of International Relations, and he is also managing editor of the journal ASEAN Insights. And our third professor is my former colleague, Dr. Chulchip Chinwano. Dr. Chulchip was the chairman of the International Relations Department of the Faculty of Political Science, Thammasat University, from the year 2000 to 2006. He also taught there for more than 30 years. And after that, he became the director of the Masters of Art program in International Relations, and later on, vice rector of International Affairs. Because we have limited time, so I would like to request each of you to speak for 20 minutes, and then we'll leave about 10 minutes for question and answers. We'll start with the lady. Okay.
Thank you very much. I would like to join the rest of the speakers in thanking Thammasat University, in particular Associate Professor Dr. Prapat and Dr. Songkit, for the kind invitation for me to participate in this very important Thammasat University ASEAN International Conference 2014. I am privileged to have been asked to come and speak at this particular time, and I would like to thank previous speakers, in particular, or starting from the Deputy Permanent Secretary of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs of Thailand, Kun Manasavi, and the former ASEAN Secretary General Surin Pitsuwan, and other speakers in the first two panels for making my life easier, because they had talked about everything that I wanted to talk about. So thank you very much. And when Kun Corinne said for me to speak ahead because I am the first listed in the program, I readily said yes, because if I were to speak last in this panel, I have nothing more to say but to agree to everything that had been said before me. So I have an outline that is rather lengthy, but don't worry, I'm not going to use them, precisely because many of the issues that I had wanted to say to frame my particular contribution to this panel had already been more, shall we say, had been expressed in a more elegant, more articulate, and more inspiring manner, in particular by the former ASEAN Secretary General Kun Surin. Nobody can speak as inspiringly as he can. So even if he's no longer here, I want to thank him for framing a lot of our discussions for all of us. Okay, I want to concentrate my contribution to this particular panel to the role of ASEAN-centered political security mechanisms in the regional security architecture of our region. But I don't mean only the region of Southeast Asia. I think ASEAN is already an important regional political security player, but it is beyond Southeast Asia in my view. It's even beyond East Asia, and I think it can cover the Asia Pacific in terms of an ASEAN-centered regional security architecture. So this is my mission. It's something like trying to contribute to making ASEAN be there, for all of us. So a small contribution in the mission that Kun Surin had set out for himself to make ASEAN better known and more effective, more efficient, better able to implement its commitments, etc., etc. Okay. In terms of the regional security architecture that we have in our region at present, there are at least 3 different clusters that you might consider or you might identify. The first would be bilateral military security alliances between states. The second would be the US-led hub and spoke system, so-called, based on the San Francisco alliance system that was set up immediately following the end of the Second World War and further consolidated during the period of the Cold War. In our part of the world, we had CETO, still not formally concluded, still there, but it's moribund, okay? And then the third would be the ASEAN-centered mechanisms about which many of our speakers had already alluded to in one way or another. My own choice, of course, because I'm after all an ASEAN citizen like Termsak, is for the ASEAN-centered mechanism to be strengthened so that it can serve as a basis for a regional security architecture, not only for Southeast Asia, not only for East Asia, but also for the Asia Pacific. Why is this so? Well, there are many reasons for this. No? Of course, I believe in putting ASEAN as central to East Asian and broader regional regionalism. And it is in the sense in which Termsak already talked to us about what centrality means in ASEAN. But in addition to this, I think I must say that ASEAN centrality was by default in the early days. But now we can't do, but what do I mean by default? Because of the fact that none of the major regional players, including China and Japan, for example, could recommend anything that had to do with political security cooperation or political security arrangements without inviting the suspicion of each other as well as major players. It was only ASEAN that I think had the trust and confidence of many of these, if not all of them, of these big players in our part of the world, and because of the fact of size. So I want to say that size can be a strength. It was pointed out as a weakness earlier because when you are small, there are not too many things that you can do. Your capacity is limited, etc., etc. But in my view, the size of ASEAN, the fact that it's composed of small and medium-sized states, the fact that the track record of ASEAN had been quite exemplary because when we started in 1967, we were quarreling with each other practically, but we turned the region of Southeast Asia into something that was stable, prosperous, and the basis for other players to be attracted to our processes. So I think the fact that we are we are composed of small-sized states is a strength of ASEAN, and that attracted other big other players, especially the big ones, to come in and join in our political security processes, okay? But the other thing that I want to do, that I want to argue or to share with you is the idea that if we were central to East Asian regionalism and even Asia-Pacific regionalism to some extent in the past, and we earned this by default, we can no longer do so. Now we have to earn it. Now we have to deserve it. And apart from being the driving force, not being in the driver's seat, I have a problem with that analogy. And I tried very hard to look for driver's seat, the driver. In the ASEAN documents, I couldn't find it. In my view, we make ourselves, we make our life a little bit more complicated when we use the analogy of the driver and the driver's seat. And in fact, we have always sort of disparaged ourselves by saying that we are young countries, we are young drivers, we can't even get a driver's license. And how can 10 countries be in the driver's seat when one wants to go to this direction, another one goes to another direction, and so on and so forth? So I think the use of driving force, the use of core, the use of centrality probably would be preferable to being a driver and occupying the driver's seat. So forgive my being too academic as far as this is concerned. But not too long ago, a few weeks ago, in fact, in Kuala Lumpur, I heard one former Secretary General, not Kun Surin, but another one, who said something about centrality in a different way, or maybe in a similar way as Termsak said. And he said that ASEAN is a family. We are a family of 10 countries, and the members of this family have important relations with other, non-family members. They're very constructive relationship. But when they belong to a family, they have to stick together. They have to sort of support each other. When one member of that family does not eat breakfast, the rest of the members of the family ought not to eat breakfast. I think this has to do also with we feeling, the empathy, the cohesion that Termsak earlier spoke about. I think this is terribly, terribly significant, because when we look at our individual families, indeed, our members have close ties with outsiders, but as a member of the family, we stick together. I think this is very important to keep the centrality of ASEAN and its cohesion. Okay, why do I prefer, other reasons why I prefer the ASEAN-centric institutions as the basis for a regional security architecture for the Asia-Pacific is because of the fact that the hub and spoke, the system of military alliances that is centered on the United States is very exclusionary. It invites suspicion, it increases tension and lack of confidence and lack of trust. It's very exclusive to those that are members of the hub and spoke system. But the ASEAN-centric institutions are very inclusive, and I think this is very, very important. There are other principles that I think ASEAN already possesses and practices in terms of building a regional security architecture. The first of this, there are only 4 that I would like to share with you. There could be others. The first is the non-threat or non-use of force when we deal with other countries. We have this already in the Treaty of Amity and Cooperation, in the Bali Principles, for example, and we also have it in the UN Charter. The second important principle is peaceful settlement of disputes. We ought not to use military might in settling disputes. We need to settle disputes peacefully. We have this in our charter. I believe it's in one of the articles. I can't remember which one. And then the third principle is open, inclusive, and evolutionary processes. And when you look at ASEAN, it's been like that. It's open, it's inclusive, it's evolutionary. And then fourthly, mutual respect for diversity, because we are diverse. As constantly pointed out, we are aware of this. We are very, very diverse. And I think we celebrate our diversity. But I want to put a word on diversity after having said that we need to respect diversity. Diversity is wonderful in our experiences in ASEAN because we tend to complement each other and the richness of the fabric that is ASEAN is due to our diversity across many fronts. However, in building a community, I don't think we can be too diverse. And our leaders, especially those that drafted the ASEAN, originally it was ASEAN Security Community, it became ASEAN Political Security Community, because ASEAN Security Community's acronym, I think, is ASC, and it could stand for ASEAN Standing Committee, so we don't want to be confused about that. I pay tribute to those that drafted the ASEAN, the concept of the ASEAN Political Security Community, because they put in the idea of needing to have political development to shape and to share norms. So the norms that we are supposed to share are not the norms that we have already, but we have to shape, which means that there are new norms that we can shape from old ones, or new norms that we can adopt, and so on and so forth. Political development, under that section, I remember that we need to become a little bit more like each other. We need to subscribe to the principles of human rights, of rule of law, and democracy even. And I think it's the leveling off in these particular elements where the diversity that is, I think, at the root of our difficulties right now in building this community and in reaching out to our people lies. We have too diverse systems of governance, therefore we cannot understand each other too much. And how can ASEAN begin to promote democracy, for example, when the views of many of our members on democracy vary from one another? This is why, Termsak, it's not just because you're here, but I know that you had a very strong hand in the drafting of the blueprint for the APSC. Under political development, you did say something about, or the section did say something about the need for leveling off in a way. No, what do you call? I am not quoting verbatim, but the need for our elites, for our peoples at all levels to try to understand one another in terms of our conceptions about democracy. How do we do this? We can do this by talking to each other in seminars, in training programs, and stuff like that. Now, the ASEAN-centered mechanisms are principally the ARF, the ASEAN Regional Forum, that Kun Surin reminded us was established. The first meeting was held in this very hotel where we are right now. The East Asia Summit, which is different from the East Asia Summit that was recommended by the East Asia Study Group in 2001, 2002, I think, where the recommendation among several would be for the summit of the ASEAN +3 to slowly evolve into an East Asia Summit. But we accepted this at a time of dire conditions for us. This was the Asian financial crisis. And in my recollection, ASEAN, in its whole history, did not have any chapeau for different kinds of activities other than the East Asia Study Group's set of recommendations. But when ASEAN recovered from the Asian financial crisis, we set off in our own way of trying to build an ASEAN community of 3 pillars. We did, thanks to the Malaysian chair at that time, convened our own version of the East Asia Summit, which is different from the EASG, the study group for East Asia Summit of ASEAN +3 to evolve eventually into, or slowly, into an East Asia Summit. The recommendation of the East Asia Study Group would confine the East Asia Summit to the ASEAN +3. So there will be no other colors other than yellow and brown, I guess. But the whites are excluded. However, the East Asia Summit that evolved from 2005, I think, where you had the ASEAN +3, then another +3, namely Australia, India, and New Zealand, and then +2, which is Russia and the United States, is, I think, a way of ASEAN saying that we need to have very good relations with every relevant player. So ASEAN as a whole will have no preferences for one or the other. We cannot demonize China, for example, as ASEAN. Individual countries can demonize China, but as a group, ASEAN will have to have beneficial relationship with every major player that is relevant to ASEAN. Okay. The problem, however, is there are perceived and maybe real shortcomings of some of these key or of the ASEAN-centered mechanisms. The problems involve coordination and overlaps. You will note that the agenda of many of these ASEAN-centered mechanisms tend to overlap. Even if originally they have a set of agenda that is different from the agenda now, but they try to sort of like address contemporary issues, many of which had been discussed in previous sessions. So there's a problem of coordination where, and the suggestion that I want to make, we can talk about this in the Q&A if there's time, is for the ASEAN Regional Forum to be a strategic dialogue process, okay? For the East Asia Summit to be to provide strategic direction to the regional security architecture, and for the ADMM Plus and the newly established ASEAN Maritime Forum and ASEAN Maritime Forum Plus in particular to deal with practical security cooperation, because after all, these are composed of uniformed services and they're the ones that have the capacity to undertake practical security cooperation purposes. Okay. In the coordination also, it's terribly important for one mechanism, such as the ARF, to know what the EAS or the ADMM Plus would be doing. So there has to be feedback, mechanisms for them. We can talk about this again later on. Number two, the need for resources that Termsak already talked about earlier. And we know that the resources are also tied to the charter, because in the charter, the annual contribution are equal. And some people say this will maintain the equality of all the ASEAN member countries. I would like to see a charter amendment to reflect the capacity to pay on the part of ASEAN member states. But in the meantime, I would like to suggest that whoever is the ASEAN chair, and I'm looking at Malaysia because Malaysia is going to be the next chair after Myanmar, to provide an additional contribution on a voluntary capacity to pay basis, but to last beyond the chairmanship. I think that that kind of gesture will be, shall we say, replicated in various forms by other ASEAN member states who do not want to be outperformed by other members. Oh, 2 more minutes, okay. So, and of course, sorry, Termsak, but we have to look up to our dialogue partners. And Surin, when he was Secretary General, kept on saying this. We can't do this on our own. Please help us because you have a stake in this as well. Finally, the expansion of support. How can we expand the support for the EAS, for example? It's confined to ASEAN, the chairmanship. So in our experience in the Track 2 process of the Council for Security Cooperation in the Asia-Pacific, or CSCAP, ASEAN ICs decided, the members of CSCAP who come from ASEAN ICs decided, let's no longer keep the chairship to ourselves. Let us share this with the non-ASEAN member committee, and we did that. We've been doing this since 1990, since 20 years ago, 1994, 1993. Finally, I would like to also say that ASEAN consensus decision-making, a word on ASEAN consensus decision-making, it's fine, it has served us well. But I hope that ASEAN consensus decision-making should not be interpreted as unanimity. Consensus is not unanimity. Where can you find an intergovernmental organization where 10 members have the veto? The United Nations has close to 200 members, but only 5 have the veto, okay? Finally, how can we excite 600 million people about ASEAN? I think one way by which this can be done is for the benefits of the ASEAN political security community's enhanced security cooperation among the 10 member countries and outsiders, and for the benefits, the economic benefits of the ASEAN economic community filter to the people of ASEAN. Another way of doing this, I think, is for recognizing the fact that if we do not address the concerns of our people, there will be no ASEAN community, whether it will be 2015 or beyond. Thank you very much. I'm sorry for taking so long.
Thank you very much. Professor Hernandez has talked about the three clusters of regional security architecture, and she concluded that the ASEAN-centered mechanism has gained the most trust because of ASEAN's special characteristics as well as some of its good principles. And she also analyzed some of the shortcomings of this mechanism and offered many solutions and alternatives for the coming ASEAN community. So we'll go to the next speaker.
Thank you very much, Professor Corinne, for the time. And first of all, I would like to extend my gratitude, joining other previous speakers, to thank Professor Prapat and Thammasat University for inviting me to be in this very important conference. And secondly, I would like also to join Professor Hernandez in expressing that most of all my talking points are already discussed previously, so I have more self-defense than Professor Hernandez because I speak after her. And the third, because I do not like a sad ending story, I would like to continue the make-up story by the moderator of the second session, Mr. Kam Kun. I will continue from the episode when the Thailand leader kicked Cambodia out. Okay, so after Cambodia was kicked out, then the helicopter continued, but not long after that, the machine is still not working. So the machine is still not working, and then the pilot gave an announcement. Okay, the machine is not working, so let's us all jump from the helicopter. So everybody else are also jumping for ASEAN unity. So they jumped, and finally, for some fortunate occasion, then suddenly they were gathered in a same deserted island. So they met again with the United States, they met again with the China, they met again with the Cambodia. After the reunion, then they start to think, okay, we are in a deserted island, and in this deserted island there are limited resources, limited food. We only have some food taken from the helicopter. So how should we share this food? Because we need food to live. And then, because the United States, because America and China are the two strongest people there, the Chinese leader learned Kung Fu, and the American president learned American mixed martial art. So they start to collect supporters, and then they start to, okay, that's let me decide the distribution of food so we can all be saved. Both camps could not agree, and then they start a Cold War. They start to skirmish each other. They start to steal the food, etc. But because they are fighting each other, the Kung Fu camp and the mixed martial art camp, fortunately the Muay Thai is not joining the fight. So they lost many times because they they lost a lot of time because they are fighting each other. And then the rest of these two camps are thinking, okay, so maybe we should decide this not by fighting, by the expertise of the martial art. Maybe we should start talking. Because I'm not an expert of martial art, because all of us are not expert of martial art, let's talk. And then the rest of ASEAN leaders are inviting the China and the United States leaders to sit together and to talk about how to distribute the food. So they have the time to, after they agree, they can distribute the food. Then they have time to call for rescue team from out of the island. So that's a make-up story, so don't quote this, but that probably illustrates the position of ASEAN in the great power politics in the region. As Professor Hernandez pointed out, ASEAN is made up of small or medium power countries, and that is not necessarily bad because of that, ASEAN can safely invite major powers to talk together. It is interesting to see, for example, how China, Japan, Republic of Korea, United States meet more often together in ASEAN's forum instead of outside the ASEAN forum. But as all speakers has noted, this is not something that is automatic. The leaders in that deserted island have to talk, rise, and invite both martial art experts to sit together and to believe in them, that they will provide a forum that will benefit both the Kung Fu camps and the mixed martial art camp. So having said that, I would like to highlight that the role of ASEAN is not only important in maintaining regional peace and security, but if we look at the global and regional context, is also important in maintaining the global peace and security. It's not necessarily because ASEAN is emerging as a global player, but more because of the global stage is coming to the region, that the global stage is coming to ASEAN. That is why I would like to present today is titled "The History Does Not Repeat Itself, ASEAN and the New Global Power Balance," because after all of our discussions today, there are several points that emerged. First, there was a worry that there will be a more dangerous region because of several trends. First is the rise of new power, and then the decline of the old power, or the stagnation of the old power, and then the danger of the crumbling global governance or ineffectiveness of multilateral organizations, the collapse of the idea of liberal internationalism, the backlash against globalization, and the rise of nationalism. These points were pointed out by most of the speakers of these seminars. What is interesting to me is that these points are eerily similar with what is happening not in the early 21st century, but in the early 20th century. And thus maybe we can learn something from the past. Wisdom is always coming from our willingness to learn, including from what has happened. So, as speakers had already noted, global stage is coming to ASEAN. We are witnessing China's rise, U.S. pivot to Asia, as illustrated by the untraditional visit of Mrs. Hillary to Asia instead of coming to Europe, and then the actions by Japan and Korea, and especially Japan. This July, Japan agreed to reinterpret the Article 9 of the Constitution, which means that Japan now can participate in a collective self-defense. It's going an inch to a normal state. So many are thinking that there is a gathering storm in Southeast Asia and in East Asia in a wider perspective. And this storm is not only affecting the region, but this storm will decide the future of the global governance. In this context, for now, ASEAN has been remarkably successful in managing interstate relations and in providing modalities for the engagement of external powers in the region. It has proven to be effective in building confidence and in preventing conflicts among the member states. The association has also been the driving force in the process of broader security and economic multilateralism in Asia-Pacific. But Southeast Asia is an open geopolitical and strategic landscape. It is not only open, but also a landscape where interests of most major powers are converging. So it's very sensitive to a global, a change in the global balance of power, and also will be very influential in shaping the global balance of power and global governance. If we look, for example, this is the data from CIPRI and the World Bank. China's military expenditures already surpassed Japan's military expenditures 7 years before its GDP surpassed Japan's GDP. So this shows that not only that political assertiveness is a function of economic development, but there is a willingness to capitalize economic growth for ensuring further economic growth by developing powers. And if we see, there are also an increase of military expenditures, military spending in ASEAN, mostly in countries such as Indonesia and Vietnam. This is understandable if we look at the relations between countries in Southeast Asia in light of power politics, which unfortunately still pretty much coloring the interactions in the region. Realpolitik is, well, real. This is the statement of the Chinese Foreign Minister, Yang Jiechi, quoted in the ICG report. China is a big country, and other countries are small countries, and that's just a fact. This is response to the criticisms from Southeast Asian countries in ASEAN Regional Forum in Hanoi, July 2010. Of course, this is not to demonize China, but to understand that power politics still matter, and we need to take into account this into developing a more peaceful region. And this trend is not only, this is repeating what happened in the earlier period, in the early 20th century. Asia and Southeast Asia was at the center of the changing global politics in the early 20th century. It follows the rise of Japan in after the Meiji Restoration, and then in the early 20th century, especially when Japan destroyed Russian armada in the Tsushima war, and then Japan's continued to rise as a regional power. However, until 1930s, Japan, as China today, participated in the institutions that were the pillars of the global governance. They participate in the free trade. They participate in the gold standard. They are participating in the League of Nations. They are participating in the Washington Conference. But then there was a change in the global governance. The global crisis disrupt the effectiveness of the global governance, and many global institutions are ineffective. In this confusion, German moved to attack Russia, and then Japan sees this as an opportunity to expand its power by creating an offensive to China and to Southeast Asia. At first, U.S. tried to contain through peaceful means, but finally, at December 8, 1941, both of the powers, the U.S. and Japan, started the fight. So this is kind of a historical repeat with a twist. We are witnessing a similar plot. We do not know the ending yet, but we are looking at a very similar plot. As Japan, China's rise prompted her to integrate itself into the global system. China is also opening its market. It's joining the WTO. It also embraced multilateralism. But there are also several questions. The first is the active question. Will China embrace the current global governance or revising it? And the passive question, will the global governance remain effective, especially after the global crisis? So we are looking also at this déjà vu, but let's skip this. But I would like to stress that history, while providing lessons, does not necessarily repeat. There is a danger of self-fulfilling prophecy, because we feel that this will repeat the chaotic early 20th century. Then every country start to building its arms, start to building alliances, start to invite backups from the major powers. Then the global governance really crumbled. So we need to develop an alternative ending of the story. And we have several hopes. There are differences between global governance in early 20th century and 21st century. If we look at the Kantian perspective, the liberal perspective, at least we have several breaks for war. First is the free trade. We have different level of economic interdependence today. UN, despite its problems, are still much more effective than League of Nations. And we have also developed a relatively stable international norms, including the norms of border fixity, which do not give place for another political expansion, territorial expansion. And then there are different attitude of rising powers. We are not witnessing Hitler's Germany, despite the rise of nationalism in Europe and in other parts of the world. Again, ASEAN is important for Southeast Asian countries to manage China's rise and great power game in the region. Regional governance, in the other hand, will be important for the stability of the global governance, but ASEAN unity and effectiveness is also in question because of this development, as seen in the case of Trans-Pacific Partnership, where ASEAN countries are divided, and also in the case of South China Sea issue. So the response should be by consolidating ASEAN, strengthening intra-ASEAN leadership, and maintaining ASEAN's centrality to the broader regionalization project. However, there are some challenges in global, regional, and domestic. I believe that even when we are talking about global and regional trends, many of the factors shaping this regional and global development is also in the domestic factors. So we should look at these three levels simultaneously. At the global level, we have a challenge in the global crisis and the sustainability of the global governance. In the regional, we have a challenge to make ASEAN way as a way to move forward, not as a justification to keep this way without moving forward. At the domestic level, we have witnessing reactions to globalization in form of rise of nationalism and various domestic political developments. Just want to show you that nationalism is a common trend everywhere, and this is what is happening in Indonesia. Nationalism is on the rise. On the right side is Prabowo, and both of the candidates are using nationalist rhetorics, and they even use nationalist imageries. Prabowo even used the microphone from the revolutionary period to stress his similarity with the founding father, Sukarno. Jokowi is using the image of Sukarno. And we are witnessing similar trends across the globe where political parties with nationalist orientation, with nationalist tone, are gaining ground, and primordial identity is also going stronger, as we witness in ASEAN, in Myanmar, in Brunei, where the Sultan enacted the Sharia law. We are witnessing more nationalist conflicts such as Preah-Vihear in Thailand and Cambodia. And these developments will affect the effectiveness of ASEAN, of course. And this is related to inequality. Why? Because as the research has shown, if inequality grows, nationalist sentiments is also growing. This is research by Bock showing that both in high-income countries of ASEAN and low-income countries in ASEAN, inequality are both rising at a similar rate. It is understandable that the voice for nationalism, for more protectionist measures, for less regional integration is also gaining ground and becoming louder and louder. To solve this, we are looking at the global level, we are looking at the regional level, but we must address challenges at all of these levels, domestic, regional, and global levels simultaneously. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. I'm not a good. I'm not good in telling jokes like Ajahn Akrapong, and not good in telling stories like Professor Chofwan, but I'm a good listener. So I can understand that you try to compare the story to explain how weaker states have to unite in order to fight against the stronger powers, just like ASEAN has been doing. And also what you have talked is about ASEAN in the global stage, how ASEAN balanced the power of United States, China, Japan, and Korea in Asia, and especially responding to China's growing economic and military power. And also you have compared changing global balance power of the present time to the past situation. And also, you talk about the domestic factors that might affect ASEAN success. For example, the rise of nationalism by citing the example of Indonesia. So it's very interesting. Thank you. Now I request Ajahn Jurachip.
Thank you very much, Madam Chairman. Well, to be the last one of the sessions and also the last one of the day, is both a blessing and also a curse. A blessing in the sense that everybody, all the distinguished speakers have already talked about everything, especially Carolina Hernandez, my close friend for a long time. She covered all the ground that I prepare for it. And I am not a good joker, so I cannot have any interesting story to tell you. But that's the blessing. But the curse is that you have to say something. Anyhow, I hope that I will be able to say something that will give you some ideas about the topic that we are talking today. I just come from another conference this morning. It's overlapping of schedule, not overlapping of sovereignty, fortunately. Anyhow, I came from another conference this morning at Pranburi, about 10 kilometers south of Hua Hin, organized by the ASEAN Department of the Ministry of Foreign Affairs. And I gave a talk from 9 to 12 and come back all the way here. At first I thought that maybe can we get a helicopter coming over there, but he said all the helicopter has been used by the military at the moment, so I have to get special permission from General Prayut Chan-o-cha, which is quite difficult at the moment. He's quite busy. Anyhow, I come back and arrive here at 3 o'clock, which is fortunate. That's why I'm here. But anyway, I'm so sorry that I could not participate and listen to the speaker this morning. We had 2 sessions in the morning discussing the 2 levels of strategic landscape, the global one and the regional one. My task here will try to I will limit my discussion on the analysis of what kind of role ASEAN can play in the emerging global and regional political security landscape. However, I would like to limit my talk only on the regional level. But here I do not only mean Southeast Asia, I mean much larger than that, the East Asian region or the Asia Pacific region. And we can see that ASEAN nowadays, in the year 2014, we will be 48 years next year. We have gone through many storms, economic storm as well as the political strategic storm. In 2014, this year, we can say that ASEAN is facing several challenges. Furthering integrations by 2015 to be ASEAN community, and also try to manage the major power rivalries and competitions in the region, as many of you have already listened to. However, ASEAN nowadays is not like ASEAN at the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, 20 years ago. ASEAN is much more integrated, although with some differences. ASEAN nowadays has 10 members. The combined population is over 620 million, which is the 3rd largest in the world. Right behind the United States, right behind China, 1,350 million, and then India about 1,200, and then ASEAN 620. United States has only 300 million. So in terms of population, ASEAN is not small at all. The combined economy is quite large as well, about 2.3 trillion, which is about the 9th largest in the world, behind United States, China, Japan, Germany, and a few others. So we are among the first 10 largest economy. Our export is quite high as well. So in terms of potentials, we have been quite successful. Moreover, since the end of the Cold War in the early 1990s, ASEAN has played a very important role in managing the East Asia strategic landscape, especially relations among the major powers, the extra-regional powers who have interest in this region. During these transformative years in the early 1990s, ASEAN, whose member in the past relied upon the bilateral security arrangement with major powers, decided to create a new regional order with the new norms and the new mechanism. The new norm was the multilateral cooperative security arrangement. Unlike in the past, ASEAN's members tend to participate in the bilateral security arrangement. And these multilateral cooperative securities are the securities through dialogue and consultation, confidence building measures, security with all the major power, not security against some of them. And the new mechanism is the ARF, set up in Bangkok in July 1994, whose all major extra-regional power participate in a yearly meeting. This was quite an achievement where all stakeholders sit and talk and get to know each other about each other's concerns. Not only working on this broad platform of ARF, ASEAN has been quite innovative and quite creative in their management of the regional security landscape by trying to provide an economic political nexus looking at both the security goal as well as the development goal in East Asia by innovating the ASEAN Plus 3 framework and later on the East Asian Summit in the process of community building of East Asia so that we can share and also work together. ASEAN has been playing a leading role or central roles, as Carolina said, that in constructing the East Asian norm by extending the ASEAN norms and way into East Asia and the Asia Pacific, peaceful coexistence, peaceful settlement of conflicts through negotiation, consensus decisions, and so on and on. ASEAN also play a leading role in creating the East Asia mechanism of regional institutions. First, the APT, ASEAN Plus 3, ASEAN Plus, China, Japan, and South Korea met for the first time in 1997, and later on the yearly meetings. Second is the EAS, the East Asia Summit. ASEAN Plus 3, then add 3 more other countries, Australia, New Zealand, and India in 2005. So almost every 5 years, ASEAN has been innovating new mechanism in order to manage relations with the major powers. And these were expanded in 2011, including the United States and Russia. So the success of this strategic innovation came about probably as a result of the ASEAN leadership, not any individual role, but a collective leader of at least 6 core members: Indonesia, Malaysia, Philippines, Singapore, Thailand, and Brunei. They have defined in their own works, in their own cooperation, they may be disagree on a variety of issues, but they seem to disagree without being disagreeable in their dealing with external powers. They were able to act as one body. They appear to speak, they appear to act as one body, and also appear to speak with one voice to advance their common interests. Moreover, ASEAN achievement has been to promote, assert, and protect the basic principle of inclusivity in regional institutions. All the relevant great power are included in the ARF, and this is quite an achievement considering the initial oppositions or even reservation in Washington, Beijing, or even Tokyo, especially concerning on inclusive regional security dialogue. ASEAN has played a very important role in helping to justify the preponderant United States presence in East Asia beyond the Cold War. The ARF crucially helped to lend legitimacy to ASEAN desire for an integral U.S. role in regional security. As a result, no one can argue that United States presence in Southeast Asia is illegitimate or an intrusion into the regions. As for China, the ASEAN-led multilateral institution or mechanism helped to give China what it needs in terms of legitimacy and social status in international society. And against this background, ASEAN's second important rationale to create IRF was to provide normative setting to socialize China into being a status quo power, into inculcating all the ASEAN's norms and values. From the mid-1990s, Chinese leaders and officials began to appreciate the value of ARF and other multilateral institutions for legitimizing China's rising power. By subscribing to ASEAN norms and institutions, by subscribing to key ASEAN norms and institutions and practices, especially sovereignty, non-interference, non-use of force, China used this regional institution norm as a premier demonstration to show that they are committed to peaceful rise and regional stability. As we all know, China has been very good at copying products, and they copy ASEAN's experience and implement it in the SCO, Shanghai Cooperation Organization. We should ask for some patent, right? Anyhow, well, those are some of the achievements that ASEAN has been doing. So far, so good. So far, some successful. But will ASEAN be successful in the future in managing a complex strategic landscape of East Asia, as we listened this morning, and also mentioned by both Professor Carolinas and Dr. Shafan. Dr. Shafan also include the domestic thing, which so there is nothing left for me to talk about that. But let's look into the future. In this complex strategic landscape of East Asia, will ASEAN in the past has been innovative enough to create many norms and also mechanisms, but will ASEAN in the future be innovative enough to create something to manage the rising China, or the emerging Japan, or the rebalancing of the United States? Can multilateral arrangement and consultative be effective enough to manage, to maintain regional peace and order in East Asia? And in this matter, I would like to argue that ASEAN has in the past been facilitating the continued U.S. preponderance and China integration in the regions. However, relations among the major powers are changing with the transformation, with the transitions of power maybe in the process of coming. ASEAN need to consider, I think, for the future, how to persuade China to accept unequal power and authority vis-a-vis United States in the short term. ASEAN's strategists may have focused on constraining rising China at the expense of even more difficult tasks on how to ensure that United States temper its preponderance with restraint and legitimacy. Will ASEAN be innovative enough? But most challenging of all is unclear whether how ASEAN multilateral platform and arrangement can help socialize the U.S. policymaker into the recognition that they must negotiate seriously with China over which element of their mutual core interests are reasonable and legitimate. How this might be protected and how they might be identified and cooperate to achieve their shared imperative for the maintenance of peace and stability in Asia and Pacific. Another important challenge is how to manage the US, Japan, China strategic triangle. That is something that has to be considered. In fact, ASEAN has a very limited ability directly to transform the nature of this vital triangular relationship. Is it possible to innovate ways and means, norm and mechanism to maintain regional understanding, the interactions among extra-regional power, so that peace and prosperity can be enhanced? I think the most profound task of ASEAN in the future is to create a regional order to manage and regulate great power interactions in terms of institutionalized mutual understanding on constrained rule of conduct and conflict management. And this is a challenge for all of us, for ASEAN, in order to maintain relevance as well as centralities. So far in the past, we have been able to muddle through and be innovative, but we'll be able to stand up for these challenges that I think is need to be seen. Thank you very much.
You can see how active and responsible Ajahn Julchip is from his conduct of many duties today. So thank you very much for your talk about the transformation of ASEAN in terms of increased member, greater combined economy, expanded activities in the security area, expanding its external relations in the form of ASEAN +3, +6, and perhaps in the future +8. And he also talked about ASEAN's many achievements under ARF, especially in managing the rising China, the militarization of Japan, as well as balancing United States. And thank you for talking about the future trends and challenges of ASEAN. So now we have about, actually the time is up, but maybe we can have 10 more minutes for question and answers. Please. Please tell your name also.
Pontianendal Jr., area Jakarta. I guess I just want to go back to what Amado discussed this morning about internationalist versus nationalist in China and how it bears on ASEAN and China as a global security player. The general thrust this morning was that the rise of the nationalist in China is creating all of these problems that we see. But as China becomes the #1 economy in the world, then, like the US, like the Western Europe before, it must look at its global reach and security, and not just East Asia. In the context of a multipolar world, with US still a very important player, and in the context of some regions that are really unstable, I wonder whether in the end, China and the US may have to work together to manage the global order. Take note that before, the Pax Atlantica was underpinned by NATO. I wonder whether the incoming Pax Pacifica will ultimately be linked to having China and the US working together on the security front assuming that the internationalists in China would eventually regain. And that may have to be the case, because China needs the world, and not only the US, needs the world to grow fast. So perhaps we may be too pessimistic about China. Perhaps we have to understand the dynamics of what's going on in China to see whether the future is as unstable as we think it is. Is the South China Sea a temporary blip or actually a long-term permanent thing? It is likely a temporary blip if the internationalists would gain power. And therefore, then the ASEAN approach of norms, all these ARF and the like, could be sufficient. But if the nationalists maintain, then the current ASEAN approach would not be sufficient. If it were not sufficient, what is the alternative? I think I put a very complex question. I'd like to get your perspective on it, because it does affect how we move forward.
It's a long question, so I'll ask all the speakers to answer your question, starting from Ajahn Jurchip, who is an expert on Asia, and Kun Shafwan and Hernandez.
Well, I think we have to consider this rising nationalism not only a phenomena in China, but all over the world, especially in Asia. And this regional phenomena, if we look at Asia and Pacific, I think is a great concern to all of us. But however, the rising nationalism also has limit the options of the leader themselves. And I think the Chinese leader realize this, that nationalism also has some backlash. I think the Vietnamese also learned about this just recently. And I think this learning the lessons will make them be able to see both sides of nationalism, and hopefully that they will come to understanding that they need to control their nationalism in their own, so that there will not be a zero-sum game in the relations among powers.
Thank you very much for the question. I think this illustrates the paradox of China's growth. It is growing and is becoming more assertive. In sense, it would like to. There was a spirit to revise the existing global order, but it is this very global order is the order which makes China is able to grow. That's why I think we are in a very unique historical juncture where the future is still very open. Is it a blip or part of a longer term trend? We still do not know. But what we can learn from this is that there are possibilities to shape this, not only waiting for the internationalist to win over the nationalist, or the nationalist, how to manage this nationalist trend. But there are, international politics is a two-level game. It is, and even more, not only two, but also maybe several levels, but at least there are two levels at the international stage and at the domestic stage. Nationalism mostly come from domestic impulse, and while the implementation of this nationalist sentiment is not always open in the international politics. So what come into my mind is that yes, there are continuing paradox within China and also other Asian countries, but the development of a regional institution could help to limit the options for this. So we should not only look at the structure, at the balance of power, at the power politics, but also at the fact that this power is used or instrumentalized by people, and people can talk. And in this way, we do hope that the development of a more consolidated ASEAN will help not only ASEAN but also China to maintain its growth by integrating itself to the global order. There will be some changes negotiated with the existing global leader, but ASEAN is providing the way for negotiating that in the regional context. So we do not know the result, but we can try. We do not know what the future holds, but the best way to understand the future is by trying to shape it. That's the power of agency, by not depending to the structural constraint. Thank you very much.
I am not a sinologist, Pons, but my take here is the following, that first of all, you have the issue of different political systems and therefore ways of governance and therefore values, different ways of responding to sort of global norms. That's where we are right now. And when you have a political system, such as the Chinese political system, where you need to perform in order to strengthen your legitimacy, my take is that nationalism can be an alternative source for political legitimacy for regimes such as the one in China. I also have a problem about whether the internationalists will triumph and how, because there are many processes between point A and point B. So your question is based on many assumptions, and I'm not sure that I can really answer what the processes are that are involved in getting the internationalists to triumph over the nationalists. Okay, so that's it. The other thing is, I don't know, because I hear this all the time, the so-called condominium between the two powers, China and the US. I am not so sure that small countries and middle countries, such as those that are found in ASEAN, will be comfortable in a so-called condominium between China and the US. There's a joke that we sort of toss around among us in the field of security and also political issues. And we say that the problem about little countries like us and big countries like the two that you mentioned is that whenever they fight, we suffer, right? Because we're too small. But when they get together, we also suffer. So I'm not sure if this particular, shall we say, homegrown wisdom is applicable. But I want to support the idea that there's no harm in trying. We have been trying this. Actually, what Chula Chip earlier said about getting China engaged in multilateral institutions, getting China involved in ASEAN processes by constructive engagement, you remember the term in the old days, is actually to socialize China into some of the peaceful, coexistence, good interstate relations and principles that we have lived by over time. I have a friend in Indonesia who tries to demonstrate to the Chinese the Indonesian example. That Indonesia, he says, is the biggest country in Southeast Asia, but what it tried to do is to try to behave like a good regional citizen. sort of like putting themselves in in jail or in some kind of prison and throwing the key into the ocean. I think the lesson that they're trying to transfer to China is that China, you are a big power, don't scare the neighbors. So I don't know if this helps.
The time is up, so I would like to thank all the speakers for sharing your knowledge, research finding, and deep thoughts with us. And I guess the four of us are ASEAN optimists. So ASEAN is still a torch of hope, as Dr. Surin Pitsawan said this morning. But whether you agree with me, you have to find the conclusion by attending the seminar tomorrow.